Hi there, everyone. Welcome to the Daily Gardener. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling. It's August 29th. Well, it's time to get serious about remaking our containers, especially the ones by the front door or on the front porch. Editing containers from time to time is essential to keep them looking great. Sometimes combinations don't work well. Other times, plants can grow in unexpected ways, too tall, too bushy, or just an abject failure. With the arrival of fall, it's the perfect time to remove spent plants and replace them with selections that are more seasonally appropriate. Fall pansies are wonderful to incorporate if you live in a cold climate. They can take the colder temperatures no problem. And of course, mums and asters and even grasses are wonderful in fall pots. I always like to look for bargains at my local nurseries and big box stores. Sometimes those late finds get placed in containers temporarily before they find a home in the garden. And don't forget, you can include houseplants when you're working with your fall containers. Pathos and Croton, even chopped up sections from an overgrown Boston fern are tremendous additions to fall containers. Here's today's Brevities. Today is the anniversary of the death of the Irish botanist and friend of Linnaeus, Patrick Browne, who died on this day in 1790. There are no photographs of Patrick Browne, who was also a physician, but he was described this way. The doctor is a tall, comely man of good address and gentle manners, naturally cheerful, very temperate, and in general health. Browne's major work was The Civil and Natural History of Jamaica, published in 1756. He described 104 new species. In fact, Browne's work was the very first book published in the English language to use Linnaeus's classification system. Linnaeus was very pleased with Browne's work. He told the botanist Peter Collinson, who was friends with John Bartram and Benjamin Franklin, that he had read Browne's book, and he reflected, "No author did I ever quit more instructed," and he gushed that Browne ought to be honored with a golden statue. Browne named the genus to which cloves belong Syzygium aromaticum. And today is the birthday of the German-Austrian rosarian Rudolf Geschwind, who was born on this day in 1829. As a child, Geschwind loved gardening. As a young man, he studied forestry, and his first job was working for the Austro-Hungarian Department of Forestry. Although he performed excellent work there, his true passion was roses, and at the age of 30, he began breeding roses. It was a pursuit he would perfect over the next 5 decades. Geschwind's specialty was breeding roses that were frost-resistant. He created close to 150 rose cultivars. His prized collection of climbing roses were displayed at the 1889 World's Fair in Paris. When Geschwind died in 1910, the Countess Maria Henrietta Chotek, known as the Countess of Roses or the Pink Countess, purchased Geschwind's entire collection, some of which had never been made public. As a member of one of the most distinguished families of the Czech nobility, Chotek had the means to handle this impressive transfer. In fact, Chotek was so serious about the effort to preserve Geschwind's work that she sent 2 of her gardeners to oversee the transfer of the collection. It was no small affair. It involved packaging and moving over 2,000 roses to her estate, the manor house or castle known as Dolna Grupa. Over a century before, Dolna Grupa was the place where Beethoven wrote his Moonlight Sonata. Mary Henrietta's great-grandfather, Joseph, was friends with Beethoven, and he allowed Beethoven to live at Dolna Grupa for nearly a decade. Mary Henrietta Chotek was born almost 60 years after Beethoven's stay at Dolna Grupa in 1863. As a woman who never married, her inheritance allowed her to pursue her passion for roses with abandon, and she did. She was in her 30s when she inherited Dolna Grupa. Once it was all hers, she set about creating one of the top 3 rosaria in Europe. During its prime, the rosaria at Dolna Grupa rivaled the rosaria in France and the rosarium at Sangerhausen in Germany. Chotek was a woman of action, and she didn't just direct activities. She was very hands-on. As a rosarian herself, Chotek developed new cultivars and conducted experiments. One time, while visiting an exhibition, Chotek watched as a German horticulturist named Johannes Bettner presented a rambling rose called Fragezeichen, which means the question mark. The rose intrigued Chotek so much that she immediately left for Frankfurt to see the Fragezeichen trials in person. The year 1914 marked a turning point in Chotek's life and in the fate of many of Geschwind's roses. That year, in June, the Rose Congress was held at Zweibrücken. Chotek's work in the Rosarium were honored. But in the days following the event, Chotek's cousin, Sophie Chotek Ferdinand, wife of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, was murdered alongside her husband in Sarajevo. World War I had begun. Chotek swung into action, this time as a nurse caring for wounded soldiers. When the war was over, her rosarium was destroyed. Chotek immediately set about rebuilding her rosarium. She even began a rose breeding school right on the grounds of Dolna Grupa. But lacking the means and the energy of youth, Chotek was never able to restore Dolna Grupa to its former glory. During World War II, Dolna Grupa was ransacked by the Russian army. In February 1946, destitute and sick, Chotek died while in the care of nuns. She was 83 years old. Today, the Music Museum at Dolna Grupa holds a rose celebration every year in honor of Chotek. And tourists visit Dolna Grupa primarily to see the place Beethoven lived. Visitors bring their own baskets and collect leaves of the wild garlic that grows rampant on the grounds of the estate. In Unearthed Words, here's an excerpt from a poem called A Year's Windfalls by the English poet Christina Rossetti. In the parching August wind, cornfields bow the head, sheltered in round valley depths, on low hills outspread. Early leaves drop loitering down, weightless on the breeze, first fruits of the year's decay from the withering trees. Christina Rossetti wrote the words to 2 of my favorite Christmas carols, In the Bleak Midwinter and Love Came Down at Christmas. It was Christina Rossetti who said, "My garden cannot be anything other than myself." Today's book recommendation is Colors from Nature by Bobby McCrae. This book was published back in 1993. It's one of my favorites. McCrae shares how to grow, collect, and use flowers for natural dyes. Here's today's garden chore. Now's the perfect time to relocate your hostas to improve the aesthetic of your garden. It's hard to know sometimes when you plant a hosta how you'll feel about it once it's matured. When they're little, we often place hostas in a haphazard fashion. Here's an empty spot. Let's stick a hosta there. If you're not careful, the garden can end up looking like the hosta version of a patchwork quilt. And while you're placing your hostas, remember that your blue or darker hostas like more shade, while the lighter colors, the yellowy green hostas and the variegated hostas, can take more sun. Finally, here's something sweet to revive the little botanic spark in your heart. On this day in 1915, Ingrid Bergman, the actress, was born in Stockholm, Sweden. Ingrid also died on the same day in 1982 at the age of 67. Bergman appeared in a number of films, including the iconic Casablanca. In 1969, Bergman appeared in a movie called Cactus Flower. She was portraying a nurse named Stephanie Dickinson working in a dentist's office. The dentist was played by Walter Matthau. Gardeners adore the movie Cactus Flower for the following lines read by Bergman. Early in the film, Bergman is talking to Matthau, and she puts him in his place by saying, "Doctor, you once compared me to my cactus plant. Well, every so often, that prickly little thing puts out a flower." Then later in the film, she memorably exclaims, "My cactus, it's blooming." Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener, and remember, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day. The Daily Gardener is produced weekdays in lovely Maple Grove, Minnesota. You can find complete show notes over at thedailygardener.org, and be sure to share the show with your garden friends. You can find The Daily Gardener on all your favorite social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Pinterest, and of course, Facebook. While you're over at Facebook, don't forget to join the Daily Gardener community. Just search for these 3 words, Daily Gardener Community. The group will pop right up and then request to join. Finally, I want to thank my team at Podfly Productions, where my fabulous editor is Eric Begay. Have a great day in the garden, and we'll see you tomorrow.